Here's something that you might not know about me. And I don't know that I really knew this about myself until a couple of years ago. But my favorite sporting event is not the Super Bowl. It's not the World Series. It's not the NFL playoffs. It's not the Stanley Cup. It's not the NBA Finals. It's not the Chicago Bulls play in tournament in the NBA. My favorite sporting event is the Masters. And every year I find myself enamored by Augusta National Golf Club and the way that it is revered by people across golf, by people across sports, by everyday people who may not even be that big of golf fans. I am enamored by its exclusivity. I am enamored by this kind of secret, stowed away little golf club in northeastern Georgia that has so much history. Some of it good and some of it bad, but Augusta National and what that means to the golf world, and it being the major that everybody cares about, the iconic green jacket, which was made in Cincinnati for many, many years by the Hamilton Tailoring Company. Um, the Butler Cabin Trophy and the Champions Locker Room and these iconic holes that play the same, and we're so used to seeing them year after year. I think it's the coolest sporting event in all of sports. And I was thinking about my sports bucket list, and I think it's number one. Go to the Masters would be number one. And I part of the reason for that is because everybody I've ever talked to or everybody I've heard that's been there, they all say the same thing. It exceeded my expectations. It was way more than I ever thought it would be. It was mind blowing, they say. It took your breath away. I heard someone who I respect and has seen a lot of things in sports over the course of his career say that it took his breath away when he came out of the trees and saw Amen Corner, 11 and 12 and 13 there at Augusta National. He said that it took his breath away. This is a guy who's been to Super Bowls and World Series and all sorts of stuff. And being on that golf course was amazing to him. And that tournament and what it means to so many people, I just think it's so cool. The cheap prices, the no cell phones, the fact that it's nestled into a town that's otherwise really not that great of a town in Augusta, Magnolia Lane, the iconic branding, and this kind of cult like secrecy about it, I just think is fascinating. And I can't get enough of it. And so to see the Masters this past weekend and to see what Rory McIlroy did, man, that was unbelievable. It was so, so cool. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Reds, and let's finally get into some draft conversation about the Cincinnati Bengals, shall we? Let's go. If you're watching on YouTube, I switched over to iced coffee. It's getting warmer out there. So I'm at iced coffee for the moment. And shout out to my Mainers. If you see this, anybody in Maine, I miss you. I miss Maine deeply. Going down the rest of by the way, hi, hello, and welcome in to the Ball Don't Lie podcast, episode number 133. I am your host, Austin Elmore. You can call me Auty. Mostly everybody does. Follow me on everything at Auty Elmore. Thinking about the rest of my sports bucket list. Right now, there's only two that I can really think of, which is Augusta and the Masters and the Rose Bowl. I think the Rose Bowl would be really, really cool. Following, past that, Fenway Park is one I've never been to. I've been lucky enough to see a couple games at Wrigley, and that was awesome. I've seen Ohio State, Michigan at Michigan. That was unbelievable. I would love to see that game in the shoe as well. I guess any Super Bowl would be cool. But that's a little bit different because it moves around. I would like to know yours, your sports bucket list. Give me the top three. What do you want to do? What do you want to see? Where do you want to go? Who do you want to see? You can really open it up to anything. But watching Rory McIlroy on Sunday fight the demons of the last 10, 11 years or whatever it's been for Rory, trying to overcome all these different missteps and failures, and there was some injury, and there was personal conflict, and there was all sorts of stuff going on with the PGA Tour and the Live Tour, and he becomes the face of golf, and just all sorts of stuff that happened for Rory, who came onto the scene 10 years ago, 12 years ago, just mopping up the competition, winning multiple majors, and just could not figure out Augusta National. If you think back to 2011, he had a four-stroke lead going into Sunday at the Masters and wasn't able to hold on to it. And that's kind of been haunting him for a while. And then the multiple missteps by him on the back nine, or the second nine, as they say at Augusta, the second nine on Sunday, which they always say at the Masters really doesn't start until the second nine on Sunday, and you could see that. Credit to Justin Rose, credit to Ludwig Oberg, who made it tough on Rory, and Rory made it tough on himself as well. But to go to that playoff hole and for Rose to hit two great shots, and then Rory to hit two better shots than that to sink that putt for the Masters, and to see all that emotion overcome him, all the weight that had been on his shoulders, becoming just the sixth player to make the career Grand Slam, complete the career Grand Slam. And I thought Scott Van Pelt made a good point when he was talking about, this hasn't happened in 25 years. It's the last time it happened. And Rory is on this list with Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus and guys that are in black and white photos, guys that are no longer with us. It's something we might not see again. I might not see again in my lifetime, is a player completing the career Grand Slam like this. Now you might be thinking Scotty Scheffler or someone else. Sure, there's always going to be somebody that's going to be flirting with it, but it is so hard to get to. And to see Rory do that on that stage at that tournament in that way was really, really cool. I've always been a guy where Tiger is my number one and Tiger moves the needle for me, but it's always been Rory number two. And the reason for that being that, Tiger and Rory have this great relationship, and he idolized Tiger growing up, and they were partners with Nike, and they were been partners with the PGA Tour and this whole live thing and all this other stuff. Two just fascinating guys with a fascinating relationship. And to see Rory do that was one of the coolest things I've seen. Like, the 2019 Masters still is probably my favorite sporting event I've ever watched, when Tiger made the comeback to win. Um, and then this one is right up there. It's got to be number two for me, to see Rory and the way that tournament played out. Just unbelievable, unbelievable. So congratulations to Rory McIlroy. And I'm excited to watch more golf this summer. It's sneaky sport. I watch it a lot. I love it. I don't like talk about it a lot. I don't get too deep into the woods about it. I'm not analyzing it. I'm not trying to have takes about it. It's just something I do for fun, to watch that. And that was really, really cool. And as a sports fan, and being able to enjoy something I don't really have to have a take on, that's cool. That's one of the things, like the unintended consequences of this job, the job that I have. And I'm not asking for people to feel sorry for me, because I know I'm stupid lucky, and a lot of people would kill to do what I do. But there are times when it can be hard to enjoy the moment of, a Reds game or a Bengals game or whatever it might be, because you have to come up with an angle or a take or a conversation or a way to, or an explanation, a way to discuss what's happening, instead of being a fan. And I think everybody deals with that to an extent in media. And I'm in this, the thing with radio is you're kind of in the middle. Like, you are kind of journalistic and kind of radio, or kind of journalistic and kind of media, but also you're supposed to represent the voice of the fan and be this outlet for them, and be a way to speak for them. And that's a really fun place to be. It's an exciting place to be, but also sometimes it can be hard to balance that. And that's why I love Ohio State football, because I don't really have to have a take on it. No, it's not like there's a huge market for it in Cincinnati. Like, yeah, we joke about it on our show, and there are people that care and listen and watch, and I know that, and I hear from those people. But I'm never one to, like, deep dive into the analytics of what Ryan Day is doing on offense, or what recruits are coming in. I don't pay attention to the transfer portal. I read and listen to other people who know what they're doing. And I don't, because I don't have to have a take on that. I can just kind of show up on Saturday and enjoy the game. And that's what I love about that, and that's what I love about golf as well. Speaking of, and to transition as I take another drink of coffee, a take about the Reds. There are 16 games into the season at the time that I'm recording this. This is Tuesday morning, April the 15th, Jackie Robinson Day. And I'm looking at them through 16 games, and the fact that they went through these offensive struggles and some of these injuries, I don't know how you're not happy that they are at 500. Like, yeah, you should be happy about that. You should be thrilled about that. But still see some things that I'm taking note of that I think could come back to haunt them later. The first of which is the construction of the batting lineup. I've never been that guy. I often defend the manager because I believe that in years past with the Reds, the manager didn't have much say in the lineup. I believe it was more than anything Nick Kroll, Brad Metter, baseball operations, assistant coaches, analytics people that kind of derive how to put the lineup together. And that's not uncommon across baseball. That happens a lot. But Terry Francona really has full authority of the lineup and its construction. And our pal Charlie Goldsmith wrote about this for the Dayton Daily News. Highly recommend you check it out. And in this construction of the lineup, there's a couple of things about Francona that are old school. Not just the lineup, but the propensity to bunt, which I'm not a huge fan of. They've bunted more frequently than they normally do. I don't love that. I understand it. I don't love it. So that's one thing I'm earmarking. The other thing is stolen bases are down, and they're kind of only stealing in certain situations, 2 outs, runner on first. There's not as much freedom in stealing bases, it feels like. Um, and the team is kind of built around that. So that kind of feels to me like it's pulling away from a strength. Now you have to get on base to do that, and they haven't walked a lot, so that's part of it. And they haven't hit very well, so that's part of it. Their on base percentage entering Tuesday night, I believe, is under 300 as a team, which is very, very poor. It's hard to steal bases when you're not on base, and as we know about the saying, you can't steal first base. So I get that. So the other thing is the construction of the lineup. He has TJ Friedel as the leadoff hitter almost every day. Okay, sure. And then it's this, kind of weird stretch of Santiago Espinal and Blake Dunn or whomever, and then Ellie De La Cruz. And when Matt McLean is healthy, McLean is batting second. I would almost kind of shuffle it around. I would want McLean leading off. I'd want Ellie hitting second. And then you kind of figure out the rest. You could put Steer at third. You could put Friedel at third. You get Stevenson there when he comes back, whatever it might be. I just feel like that is an old school and outdated way of building the lineup. Last year, the Reds' leadoff hitter, the hitter in the leadoff position, came to the plate over 100 more times than the third batter in the lineup did. So think about that. Is there anybody on the team that you want to have 100 plus more plate appearances than Ellie De La Cruz? No. So part of that is, okay, well, let's put Ellie at the leadoff spot. I understand if people don't want to do that. I think McLean is probably the best hitter when he's healthy, so I'd put him at the leadoff spot, and I'd put Ellie in second. There have been multiple times already this year where in a big moment, Santiago Espinal is at the plate. Blake Dunn is at the plate. And maybe they get on, maybe they reach. Oftentimes they don't, and Ellie De La Cruz never gets there. Or Ellie, it never comes around to the point where Ellie is the guy batting with runners in position or whatever it might be. And we saw that over the weekend with Ellie hitting a grand slam. And part of that was because of a walk, which hasn't happened very often, and a hit by pitch. Twice Blake Dunn was hit by pitches. You can't count on that all the time to get the ball to get Ellie De La Cruz back up to the plate. So those are just a few things I'm earmarking. I'm not upset. I feel better about the Reds right now than I thought I was going to feel. I'm still not sold. And how they go over the next 16, so we're 16 in, how the next 16 go, that I think will determine a lot about this team. But I'm earmarking those things as mild concerns or situations of note, I guess you could say, about the way Terry Francona has chosen to go about his lineup construction, and really the overall team. Not doubting him. I'm just earmarking some things that I'm kind of worried about. All right, so let's get into football a little bit. I've been saying for weeks that we're going to talk a little bit about the draft. And to be honest, I've always kind of loathed the draft because it's a bunch of nonsense. Nobody really knows unless you are one of those people that have sources inside draft rooms. You don't really know. And a lot of times the sources inside draft rooms are spreading misinformation so that some teams are thinking one thing or some teams are thinking another, and everybody's just trying to get the guy that they want. And so I think a lot of it is a lot of it is nonsense. Okay. It really is. But so what I try to do with that is look at what does the past tell me about a particular team. And in this situation, the Bengals. I've said before, I think they're going to take an edge rusher. My current stance on what they should do is trade back and take the best defensive player available. Um, Now, I've changed that stance. I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I said take the best defensive player available. I continue to look at this roster and I think to myself, they could get two guys that start day one in the first two picks, and that still might not be enough. And that I think is the biggest issue. They have only six picks. And so history tells us that the Bengals draft to replace. I believe that Trey Hendrickson is going to play for the Bengals in 2025. I don't think he's going to be happy, and I don't think he's going to be here in 2026. Part of the reason why they drafted Miles Murphy is because they didn't think they'd get a deal done with Trey Hendrickson and he could leave the first time. Well, Murphy's still here and he still hasn't done anything, and so is Trey Hendrickson, but he's almost certainly out the door after next year. You look at the overall defensive line. Joseph Osai is on a 1-year deal. That's another guy you're going to have to replace. Cam Sample is on a 1-year deal. Another guy that you might have to replace. Sam Hubbard has retired. By the way, congrats to Sam getting married over the weekend. So there's, all those guys. Hendrick, Sample, you're going to probably move on from next year, and Hubbard, who you're moving on from this year. So you look at that and it's just screaming at you defensive end, defensive end, defensive end, edge, 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 edge. And then you look at some of the prospects. You look at a Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M. You look at Mike Green. You look at James Pierce out of Tennessee. Now, Shamar Stewart, Texas A&M, freak athlete, all the intangibles, but a project guy, more of an upside. Do the Bengals have time for projects? Now, a year ago, I said they don't. They don't have time for projects. You can't wait around. You can't get somebody that you have to develop. And what they do? They drafted Amarius Mims. He was a project, a guy that you had to wait for. Now, thankfully, Amarius Mims was shot into action early and performed at a very high level, and everybody feels comfortable about the Bengals having their right tackle of the future. In a way, they got lucky, but I give them credit for it. So now it's like, okay, you've put yourself in this position because of your inability to negotiate with Trey and your inability to draft other good defensive linemen. Here you are in the first round. You need help on defense. Is it as simple as looking at the history of the Bengals and saying they're going to draft an edge player? Now, the other thing about the history of the Bengals since Zach Taylor has been here is that they don't really touch guys from small programs and they don't really touch guys with off field issues. So that would essentially eliminate Mike Green from Marshall. This guy has been unbelievably productive at Marshall and one of the best sack players, how am I trying to say this? One of the sack leaders and most explosive physical edges in college football. But he's also had sexual assault allegations levied against him at the high school and college level. And there are legitimate character concerns, and he comes from a small program. So to me, looking at the history of the Bengals, you eliminate that. Now, they have taken character concern guys in the past. They took Jackson Carman out of Clemson. That didn't work out. They took Jermaine Burton out of Alabama. That hasn't worked out. So 0 for 2 in your last two guys with character concerns, I don't think the Bengals would take a chance on a guy like Mike Green. I don't know that they think they have the time to develop a dude like Shamar Stewart. So you look at the edge guys, and the great elite top flight edge players are probably going to be off the board. And you might have a James Pierce available in Tennessee, who I think is a solid player and can come in and be productive. So, yeah, there's other guys in that spot. But if the top two or three guys are gone and you have other needs, when you look at 17, are you saying, all right, let's back up a little bit here. Let's trade back. We need picks. We need guys that can come in and start in day one, on day one. So maybe we can get another second round pick or another third round pick and another pick in the top 100 or whatever it might be if we move back 5, 6, 7 spots in the first round. And I think that's a real possibility for this team. And part of the reason for that is because they still have a huge question at offensive line. The offensive line is incomplete. We've talked about the fact that Cody Ford and Cordell Volson are kind of the guys right now, and they signed Lucas Patrick, but those three guys are all kind of from the same mold. And so, because of that, you start looking at the offensive linemen that are available. Kelvin Banks from Texas is an interesting one. And the other part about it is, too, none of the offensive linemen that are graded in the first round are guys that you would probably feel comfortable picking at 17. You might have a little bit of an opportunity to move back and still get a good offensive lineman. I think of a guy like Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State. Josh Simmons is up there as well. There are good offensive linemen, but not good at number 17 offensive linemen that you could take. And I think the other part that's interesting is, how do you assess value when it comes to these positions? Because you've just tied up a ton of money into T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and they've already done that with Joe Burrow. And Burrow is the franchise. And if he goes down, all of this is pointless. So do you assign that value, the value of protecting him and also trying to establish a better run game? They've had a lot of running backs visit, and in the way they drafted Eric All last year and some of the stuff we saw early, thought, okay, maybe the Bengals are going to really try to be more of a run team. Not going to be a run first team, never going to do that, but have a more productive and efficient run game. That's something they look at, and it's something that looks like they've been working on. Can you get that out of an offensive lineman in the first round? And if so, do you have to take it at 17? So now these two different positions I'm looking at and thinking they can probably address this need, but they don't have to do it at 17. And there are good players available, but at 17, it might be a reach, which is why I continue to come back to the idea that best defensive player available. History tells me they go for need. History tells me they try to replace a player. But if you can get the best player available on the defensive side of the ball, I would be shocked if they draft a tight end or a wide receiver or a running back, anybody on offense in the first round outside of an offensive lineman, and I would be shocked if they drafted an offensive lineman at 17. So you look at this and you say, okay, well, if I can get good edge rushers maybe in the second round, I can get a good offensive lineman maybe in the second round. If I trade back a few spots, then I might have two of those picks that I can address both of those needs, instead of, if I take an edge in round one, then I have to take a guard in round two. The thing that makes the most sense to me for this team is that they trade back and use two picks in the second round or in the third round or whatever it might be on those two needs. So you get a first round edge, and then you get maybe a second round edge and a second round offensive lineman or whatever it might be. That makes the most sense. The problem is the Bengals historically do not operate from a um, from a a logical standpoint. They often don't do what it seems like is the easy thing to do. And make a draft day trade, you have to have a partner to trade with, and you probably will have to give something in return for this player outside of, maybe your first round pick, or for this pick or this team or whatever it might be. So I look at all that and I wonder, if the best player available is not an edge player, is not an offensive lineman, what if it's a safety? What if it's a guy like Malachi Starks from Georgia, who fits everything, and I mean everything, that Al Golden wants to do on defense? And it also shores up that position, because You want to talk about a drafting to replace? Geno Stone is only signed through this year. Jordan Battle is only signed through next year. There's no depth at that position right now on this roster at all. So I look at that and I say, okay, well, maybe this kind of fits the box of scheme fit, replacement fit, and best defensive player available fit. That kind of makes sense to me. A guy like Malachi Starks. What about Nick? I'm so bad at this name. Eamon Worry? I don't even know if I'm saying that right. The safety out of South Carolina. Very similar. Maybe more similar to Jordan Battle than he is to Geno Stone. So maybe that's a little bit of a misfit, but could provide some positional versatility for Al Golden on defense. And so I was asking myself, excuse me, what is an easier quick fix for the Bengals in the draft? Is it the defensive line or is it the secondary? Now, they're very high on their secondary. They're very high on the players they have in their secondary. DJ Turner, Dax Hill, Cam Taylor Britt, Geno Stone turned things around the last 5 games of last year. Jordan Battle has been up and down, but you feel like is a good player. They liked what they saw from Josh Newton, but he still has some learning to do. There are pieces in the secondary. And a really, really good secondary can help out your pass rush and vice versa. Really good pass rush can help out your secondary. So to me, I look at the guys that are available. And, you look at another safety in Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame, who is projected to be a second round pick, and a guy who has a very good relationship with Al Golden, who is his defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. And so you look at all these different options and comes back to what I'm trying to say is that the draft is a crapshoot. Nobody really knows how these guys are evaluated, what the team is trying to do, what direction they want to go in. And then the other position that we haven't really talked about, because I don't think it's a top of mind for the Bengals, is their defensive line. And I should say the interior of their defensive line. They re-signed BJ Hill. I was a little bit surprised by that move. They also spent 2 premium draft picks on those players last year. Chris Jenkins out of Michigan, McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M. Now there's some good interior defensive linemen that are going to be in that area for the Bengals, most notably Derek Harmon out of Oregon. I think Derek Harmon would come in right now and have a big impact. But the Bengals have gone out of their way to talk about how much they liked McKinley Jackson and they liked Chris Jenkins. And they just committed another $30 million to BJ Hill. So that all says to me, we're not going to go after an interior defensive line early in this draft or interior defensive lineman early in this draft. I just don't think they're going to do it because the things they did in the offseason suggest they're probably going to go in a different direction. So I've kind of taken that off the board right now. I still think the most likely scenario is that they take best defensive player available in round 1 at 17. I don't know that that's the best move because they're going to have some offers for that pick and they need more picks and they need more picks in the top 3 rounds. And I don't know if you guys can hear that train. That is so loud to me. I've never experienced this before. Anyways, you basically pigeonhole yourself into having to take whatever you don't take in the first round. So if you take an edge in the first round, you almost have to take a guard in the second. If you take a guard or a tackle or whatever it might be in the first round, you almost have to take an edge in the second round. So it's like, how do the Bengals evaluate these classes of players? Who do they consider to be the deepest? Or which do they consider to be the deepest? Which do they consider to be the biggest scheme fit? And are they willing to once again reach for a player? They reached for McKinley Jackson. They reached for Jackson Carman. They have failed to develop interior offensive linemen. Like they've screwed this up a lot over the last several years. And so I don't trust them to make the right moves at all. And I don't trust them to do the thing that makes the most sense, which to me is to trade back. So I'm kind of just hoping and praying and begging that they take the best player available, which at 17, it might be Malachi Starks out of Georgia, or it might be James Pierce from Tennessee. And as many mock drafts as you watch, maybe it's Jahad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama, which they haven't drafted a first-round linebacker since Lord knows when. They haven't drafted a linebacker in the top 3 rounds since Ray Maluga in 2009. And, different scheme, different times, different people. Who knows what could happen? But I'm just looking at history. And it just makes me wonder, how many times, it doesn't matter how many mock drafts you watch or read or listen or whatever it might, nobody knows what all these teams are thinking. The Saints now have a quarterback issue. The Giants might be taking Shador Sanders. Um, Somebody's going to trade up and surprise somebody because they love somebody else. And how is that going to have a trickle down effect on everyone else? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's part of what makes the draft great and part of what makes the draft maddening. 'Cause I don't really know. All I can do is look at what they've done in the past, which is try to draft to replace players, and it's hurt them. And they've done that, and it's pigeonholed them in later rounds to having to draft for need, and they miss out on the best players available. Unless there is some sort of philosophical shift in the way that they approach the draft, I have really low expectations for the Bengals, and all I can do is hope that they take the best player available. That's really all any of us can do. That does it for this episode of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. If you liked what you heard, you can hear me weekdays 12 to 3 on ESPN 1530. I co-host a show called Cincy 360 with Tony Pike. You can listen to it via podcast if you want, wherever you get your podcast, and on the iHeartRadio app. You can also listen live. Please follow me on everything. At Auty Elmore is my at AUTYELMORE. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere you could possibly imagine. Listen, I'm like 20 followers away from 1,500 on Instagram, trying to get to that. Just went over 6,100 on Twitter. Thank you so much for that. Just went over 600 on TikTok. We're trying to build an empire here, and I'm learning as we go. So I appreciate all the support that I've gotten, everybody who continues to listen. Tell a friend about the podcast. Please give it a rating if you can. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple, whatever it might be, please give it a rating. Share it with a friend. Tell them about the draft, whatever it might be. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. NFL draft is next week, next Thursday, and we'll have a special announcement for you next week on the episode about that. So, yeah, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you again next week. And as always, have fun, be safe, go Bucks.